Hey everybody, my name is Mark Anthony Lewis. I'm a frequent presenter here at the HP Harry Potter Academic Conference. I've presented on things like consent in the Harry Potter books, or Snape as the modern Prometheus. But this year I didn't want to write anything, but I just wanted to cook. So I didn't get a chance to cook, so I just bought it. But there's lots of food back there. We had lots of contributions from you here who are also here. I wanted to put on this panel as a way to talk about food, community, and communication within the Harry Potter books. Food is a way in the books for people to gather, for people to create in-groups and out-groups. The Dumbledore's army is started at a pub. Ron is poisoned with love potion and Madame Romerta's oak matured mead. Dobby tries to keep Harry out of Hogwarts by dropping Petunia's pudding, right? Food is kind of an important part of the books, but it's also an important part of our lives. It's how we create communities. It's how we exclude or include people, whether we choose to pay attention to people's dietary restrictions or not, or whether we create restrictions based on our own beliefs about life. And coming here is really fun for me. To be frank, I don't really enjoy Harry Potter that much in my regular life. I don't get a chance to like it or talk about it that much, but coming here is a way to be a part of a thing that I used to like, that I would like to continue to like, but it's hard to do. So yeah, there's food there. I've got some index cards out there too. If anyone brought anything and you want to write dietary restrictions or allergens on there, or any sort of like restrictions like lactose intolerance, or I don't know if anyone is kosher or halal or anything like that. But if anyone wants to write that in their cards for any food that they brought, anything people want to watch out for in the food, or if you have a name for your food, if it's something that's really important for you and your community, or your life, your background in any way, and you want to share that with us, you can put it on your note card there. I wrote on mine, if you guys want to look at my note cards, I brought some things that's important to my community. I am Cape Verdean, if you guys are wondering, like, what is he? Cape Verdeans, it's a Cape Verde Islands is a archipelago off the coast of Africa. We all look like this. We all have this hair and this skin tone. So I brought some foods that are things that my grandmother used to make. My vovó, we're Lusophonic, we speak Portuguese-ish. So I brought some things. I've got some pastels there. If you know anybody who's Brazilian or Portuguese or Cape Verdean, pastels are like empanadas or like hand pies. There's tuna in them. In my experience, white people don't like fish, so you don't you don't have to eat the you don't have to eat the pastels. There's fungine behind that. Fungine, they're like corn dogs without the dog. They're cornmeal kind of donuts. They're fried. And then I made some little marmalade sandwiches. I made those up. They're Portuguese sweetbread with fresh cheese, which is like a Portuguese Cape Verdean thing, and then like marmalade. And Cape Verde Islands, a traditional breakfast is fresh cheese, like mozzarella, but not as salty, with papaya, dulce de papaya, which is like papaya marmalade, and you put that over cheese. It's like a light breakfast. It's a tropical place. They don't eat heavy. But I made little marmalade sandwiches, because who doesn't love Paddington, right? So that's what I brought. If you want to talk about something you brought, this is very casual, just being nice together. That was the point of it.
So when Mark Anthony came to me and said, hey, could we pull this together? We were like, oh my God, breakfast and a talk? Yes. So we have, I mean, if we were judging on looks alone, obviously Louise would win for her, Hedvig, oh, okay, Hedwig, Swedish, little owl muffins, pumpkin muffins, and you'll see those over there. There's pumpkin pasties, there's licorice wands, there's a number of other things, and if you need help with anything or you're worried about dietary stuff, there's also that, it's also on the tracking, or you just track down whoever made it. We'll stand over there. So please, go help yourself, and as we come back and sit down, if anyone has any food for thought and would want to take the mic and share some thoughts on food and community, we'll have you just come on up and you can just start talking and tickle our brains as we enjoy our breakfast. So please, go forth.
Okay, if I can we'll go ahead and start the food for thought type of part of this. Hello? Hello? Okay. I'll wait for a moment. I know everyone's enjoying the fellowship, but so when I heard about this potluck, I was like, oh, this is wonderful. This is my love language, because I love making food. If you're a Potterversity listener, you know I did a 2-part episode with Emily and Katie about food in Harry Potter. So if you really want to hear about it, tune into that and you can hear me talk for 2 hours on it. But just to share a few words today, when I've made Harry Potter-related foods, it's usually been in the context of some sort of celebration. Birthday party for my kids. We had a watch party for Hogwarts Tournament of Houses, where I made adult butterbeer and some other appropriate snacks for that. But I think one reason food is so important in Harry Potter, a couple reasons. One, I think it's a major part of their social life. In the absence of movies, concerts, school dances, except once every 50 years when the Yule Ball comes around, kids don't have much to do on Hogsmeade weekends other than go someplace to eat, go to the tea house, go to the candy shop, go to the pub. That's how they socialize, and I think that's very important. The other thing I thought of yesterday at Megan Fay's talk on adverse childhood experiences, Harry, who had the most adverse childhood experiences, one of them was regular food deprivation. And of course, withholding food from him was one of the ways the Dursleys abused him. And it wasn't that they didn't have food. It wasn't a war zone. They were not poor. In fact, they overindulged Dudley in that very same media, but just simply holding back food from him in order to be cruel was a big part of his childhood, and a big contrast once he goes off to Hogwarts or goes off to any place Mrs. Weasley is and is fed all he wants. So one thing I'm famous for is when I make food is making too much of it. And so I relate to Mrs. Weasley that way. It's like I want to shove a lot of food down people's throats. So that's really why I think food is so important in Harry Potter. And I like making food associated with books anyway. When I was reading Wrinkle in Time to my kids, I made beef stew and Jell-O, things like that. I like books that connect to food anyway. Lana and Beth stayed at my house to drive up here. I made 2 Cormoran Strike inspired desserts there, British recipes of different cakes that they ate in that series. So it's just something that it brings a story to life when you can eat the same food that the characters are eating. So my choice today was inspired by something that's easy to decorate in a hotel room. So, all right. So I'll stop and let someone else give some food for thought, whoever wants to.
You can pass it on. Okay, yes. I'm sticky. I spilled marmalade on my dress. But it was so delicious. It's worth it. Totally worth it. So I've talked here about food before, and I'm still working on I've taken that talk and I'm trying to turn it into a full-length, essay to try to publish. So I'm still working on that. So it's still very much in my mind. But personally, I didn't bring anything because I flew, so I apologize for that, but I am just so thrilled with all the things that everyone else brought. So thank you to everyone who brought things. personally, I will say that I was a Harry Potter fan. I became a Harry Potter fan when I was in graduate school, and that only grew as the books continued to grow out, to come out. And I started throwing these Harry Potter costume parties at Halloween, which grew to be like, 75 people at my house all wearing these amazing costumes, which is great. But the impetus for it was not the costumes for me. I know, shocker, right? It was food. It was making food. So my response, I've never been able to figure out why my response to Harry Potter is wanting to make food, while my response to Star Wars is wanting to wear that. I want to wear that. So if you see my Instagram feed, you'll see that it's just covered with pictures of me wearing Star Wars things. Also my cat. So I've never figured out why I draw those distinctions between those worlds. But I really think it's what Louise was just saying, in that food is just so important to the story world of Harry Potter. And what I noticed in doing the research that I've done is that, like Louise says, his relationship with food with the Dursleys is one of deprivation usually, and having to eat quickly when he does have access to food, throw it down for his survival so that it doesn't get taken away or thrown, dumped on the floor by Dudley. So then when he goes into the magical world, the magic of the world is expressed in food. And the food magically, the plates magically fill, and the house, it's an amazing magical transformation, and food is used to express that. So then if you think, that is very much a theme throughout the entire series, but by the time you get to Deathly Hallows, you can identify the good guys versus the bad guys by the quality of the food. So the tea that Xenophilius Lovegood gives them is wretched. And so is Xenophilius in that scene. So then when they go and find Aberforth, he gives them bread and cheese, and it's like the best thing they've ever had, because Aberforth is on their side. Despite the way each situation looks on the surface, the food tells you, and this happens over and over and over and over throughout Deathly Hallows. Really interesting, until finally in the end, Harry has this resurrection stone, the resurrection stone and the snitch, spoiler alert. And of course, it relates to touching his mouth. He has to touch it to his mouth in a kind of an eating ritual in order to open this up. And so there's this whole, and John knows I'm super interested in this. John's helped me with my paper, but it's this whole kind of metaphor for the inside versus the outside in this series, which is such an important thing. That the series tries to help Harry and the reader understand that it's really our internal life that's the most important, rather than our external. These externals are all going to go away, but what's interior you can keep forever. And food is a mediator between those two worlds. And so it's so many layered in Harry Potter, and such a great angle on the series. So who's next?
I always thought it was really fascinating that when Harry's friends were sending him stuff for his birthday, usually to eat, other presents too, but they would send him all of these birthday cakes that he could then hide in his room away from Dudley, because, Dudley got a hold of one of those, it would be gone fairly quickly, because he was never taught any self-control by his parents. But then the first time Harry is on the Hogwarts Express, having been deprived of food so much during his lifetime, the first thing he does is he wants to share bounty with Ron. He orders everything off of the cart, everything off of the trolley, and the two of them are sharing this, they're communing over this food together, which sounds like terribly unhealthy food except for the pumpkin pasties. And even that, it's probably full of sugar. Because otherwise pumpkin isn't really that palatable unless you add a lot of seasonings. But it showed immediately Harry's innate generosity, despite the fact that he'd been so deprived during much of his life.
Yes, just a couple of comments about food. We all remember that, of course, when Hagrid breaks in, what does he do? He brings food, right? A couple other notes about food. When eating goes bad, when the meals are not good, that indicates the relationship is in trouble. For instance, Cho Chang and Harry at the coffee shop or whatever it is. Doesn't go well. Also, you may remember, of course you remember this, the time in Deathly Hallows when Ron leaves. Now that's the end of that chapter. The middle of that chapter is they're listening to people over the extended ears. The beginning of that chapter is that Ron is griping about the fish and how awful it is and blaming Hermione for it. When the food goes bad, the relationship goes bad. A note about the Hogwarts feast. The feast described in the first book is the most lavish feast I've ever seen described. This was written by a woman who was living on the edge. I'm wondering how much of her own fantasies were involved in that. Also, in that other short book that the author put out during the pandemic, the Ichabod, something like that. Do you notice that all the towns are named after foods? And part of the reason for that, I think, is that this was directed at children. And if you want to explain to children the difference between being poor and being rich, don't give them numbers. Tell them the food they can have or not have. Then they get it. Who's next?
There's been a lot of talk so far about making food and providing food. But let us not forget the characters that simply enjoy the food. Ron always has his mouth full. To the point where Hermione at one point says, "How can you eat at a time like this?" To which I, along with Ron, say, "How can you not?" Dumbledore's passwords are always sweets. And the first thing we see him do interpersonally is offer Minerva candy. The enjoyment of food is the enjoyment of company. And to me, that's the whole point. Harry wasn't just deprived of food. He was deprived of community. He was sometimes forced to cook an extra rasher of bacon for the rest of the family, and they overate abundantly. He essentially started his life as a house elf. And then he was invited to the table where he could enjoy the food and was shown how to enjoy food by his best friend and his mentor. So for myself and everyone else who didn't get to bring food, I just want to give a blessing for enjoying it.
I just want to say a quick thing about a moment in the series about tea, because there's also tea and coffee provided outside, and I had a cup of tea this morning. And there's a moment I love in Prisoner of Azkaban when Hagrid's all upset about Buckbeak, and Ron says, "Oh, shall I make a cup of tea?" And Harry kind of stares at him like, "Why would you make a cup of tea?" And Ron says, "What? It's what my mom does whenever someone's upset." And that scene's always struck me as so sad and sweet, because I realized no one's ever offered Harry a cup of tea when he was upset, because the Dursleys didn't. So it occurred to me that Harry doesn't even have that association. Yes, he recognizes the love of food that comes from the Weasleys and comes from being at Hogwarts and comes from places where people offer him food when the Dursleys deprived him of food, but he doesn't even have that association that every British person should have of, yeah, tea. Well, tea you have every day anyway, no matter what, but especially that you offer when someone's not feeling great for whatever reason, emotionally or physically. And it always strikes me as just so sweet that Ron's like, that's what I know how to do when someone's upset, is make tea. And Harry has
no point of reference and looks at him like he's crazy, like, why would you do that? So just an interesting moment to me about what you offer to someone in need and how you wouldn't know if you've never received that kindness yourself.
And the punchline to that is when Dudley offers him a cup of tea later, and Harry has no idea what it is, and he like steps on it and breaks the cup. And thinks, was that a booby trap? Like, you know. Right. So I'm sorry I came in late. I don't know if people covered this before, but I've noticed in children's classics there are two scenes that recur in some really, really beloved classics, and one of them is a shopping scene. Like when you take a child to say, you know, this is your new life, we have to outfit you for it. And then there's this like lavish, almost porn-like, you know, child, you can have anything that you need. And so we have that with Diagon Alley. And the other thing is associations with food. And that's something that I think when you read a children's classic, when a book becomes a children's classic, when you can associate it with that kind of comfort, and I think of it as double ingestion. Like if you read Laura Ingalls Wilder, it's just food, food, food. And as David said, you know, that was also an author writing from food deprivation, you know, invoking a kind of comfort for children that goes along with helping your imagination. So when you have that double association, because I don't know about you guys, but when I read books like that and I read about the food, I have to go eat. Like I want to eat while I'm reading, and that I think helps memory. I think it helps encode those books in people's memory and make it more important to them. I know I keep anything with food, and how I just look straight at this person over here.
You know, I think I have a different take on the Lovegood's weird tea. I always read that, and also Hagrid's inedible rock cakes. I always read that as the way that white people are uncomfortable with ethnic foods. I mean, the Lovegoods are not necessarily portrayed as ethnic, but they've clearly got this whole different belief system. I mean, they're kind of like the weird religion family, right? And then Hagrid is the half giant, and that's why his food is a little inedible for the kids. So I think that's how I always took the Lovegoods having strange food, as a way to portray them as not like us.
I just have one quick point when you get up there for a speech, but the book explicitly talks about the deprivation of food when they're on the run, right? And they specifically point out that Ron has never gone to bed particularly hungry. He's always had something, and that it affects their mood and the whole story, really. Oh, thank you.
Okay, I have two thoughts about food. One of them is related, as some of you know, I have talked about disgust in Harry Potter, and something I don't talk about, but that the whole issue of disgust is related to, is that, as Mark Anthony said, food is, and what's your name? And Alice said, food is definitely cultural, and things that are outside of our in-group or our cultural experience, we often think of as disgusting. And disgust is definitely associated with rejection of the other, as however it's defined, and of course it's differently defined depending on your culture. And in the Harry Potter series, mudbloods are disgusting to purebloods because they're not pure, they're not clean, and dirt is disgusting. And so I think that one of the things that's important to understand about food is that our associations are very much learned, very much cultural, and people who reject other people's food as disgusting often are a little bit intolerant in other ways. And so trying new foods is part of the way that you can fit with the book version of the Harry Potter world, as to, you know, accepting new and different things. And another aspect that, actually Katie made this connection for me. I live in Western North Carolina, and our grocery store has not been stocking food because they're owned by a warehouse that was flooded out. And so my experience for the last 3 weeks before I got here was a whole lot of the camping trip from hell. It's like, okay, what can we find to eat? And there was some free food that we got, and I have to say that's been wonderful. Hats off to neighbors and FEMA and churches and people I never would have expected. I never thought I'd be getting free food. But the other thing was, just trying to figure out how to make a meal out of whatever. And it does make you appreciate this kind of community, this kind of generosity. Thank you.